Something stirs beneath the ordinary hum of June's early hours. It's the kind of movement that doesn't make noise, but rearranges everything that seemed unmoving. Most will call it a coincidence, just another tick forward on the calendar. But there are moments, rare and intentional, when time doesn't pass. It pivots. And June 3rd is one of those bends in the road that won't be labeled or explained in real time. It won't announce itself either. It will simply be, and only those attuned to subtle breaks in rhythm will recognize that it never asked for permission to arrive. The change unfolding now isn't chaotic. It's calculated. Imagine a quiet hand turning the soil beneath old roots, not to uproot, but to reroute. The first quarter moon carries with it not just symbolism, but gravitational choices. It's a kind of push, a cosmic realignment that doesn't care how comfortable the current path felt yesterday. And that's the strange part. Some will feel their certainty unthreading, their confidence bending in places they didn't think could bend. But they won't know why. If you understood even part of this, it means the signal is reaching you. Subscribe. The rest will make sense soon enough. Lately, nights may have become less restful, not heavy or distressed, but unusually vivid. Like some hidden part of the psyche stayed awake while the body tried to sleep. That's not random. That's recalibration in progress. Not everyone feels it the same way. Some won't notice at all. But if that internal hum has grown louder in the silence, it might be worth asking. What has the mind been rehearsing when no one's watching? And if it's been repeating something, maybe it's not just noise. Maybe it's a signal, just a thought. Those who feel out of sync today aren't misaligned. They're being realigned. What if the friction itself was the doorway? What if the pause was the clue? Some doors don't look like doors at all until after they close. And occasionally those doors come back around. Not as a second chance, but as a mirror. That's when the real question appears. What was overlooked the first time, and why did it return dressed in new patterns? Don't worry. The reason is already on its way, and it might arrive in ways too strange to ignore. Something peculiar has been happening behind the scenes of ordinary connection. Bonds that once felt magnetic are loosening, and the silence between exchanges is no longer passive. It's deliberate. This isn't avoidance, it's architecture. There are forces at work right now that are peeling certain energies away from the noise. Not as exile, but as calibration. What may seem like sudden distance isn't born of fatigue or distraction. It's orchestration. And that orchestration is far more intelligent than most people want to believe. This kind of stillness carries its own frequency. For some, everything has gone quiet, not just externally, but internally too. That's not an accident. It's the kind of pause that precedes fine-tuning. When everything stops responding, it's often because something else is being adjusted below the surface, just beyond the range of collective awareness. Strange how being alone doesn't always feel empty. Sometimes it feels like being prepared, not for more company, but for clearer reception. Ever notice that? It's not the kind of loneliness that echoes. It's more like a space being cleared for something that doesn't yet have form, a kind of sacred vacuum. This current moon phase, however forgettable on paper, seems to be the invisible lever behind it all. It's moving people out of sync just long enough for something else to settle in. A new pattern, a new assignment, maybe even a new signal entirely. And here's where things get even more interesting. The withdrawal may not have even started from within. Something might have stepped back first, and what's being felt now is just the ripple of that retreat. Curious, isn't it? How often silence carries more truth than any explanation ever could. If you felt something here, like it was meant just for you, maybe it was. Subscribe. No need to explain it. Just stay. Something imperceptible has stirred behind the scenes of perception. It's not surveillance in the usual sense. It's more like a frequency has tuned in. Silent, non-invasive, but impossibly precise. What's happening isn't a gaze upon the surface, but a scan through the structure. This current lunar angle, though visually modest, is functioning as a kind of inner reflector. Not mystical, not imagined. Simply a moment when something internal steps forward and begins taking inventory. And this inventory isn't about judgment, it's about honesty. The kind of honesty that doesn't flinch when all the lights are turned on. This isn't the kind of shift that makes headlines. It's the kind that arranges breadcrumbs in conversations, symbols in dreams, and echoes in familiar places. Certain words might repeat without reason. Memories might surface with no trigger. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe the blueprint is surfacing through the cracks. It's easy to miss unless there's a pause, a real one, because that's when the arrangement becomes obvious, reality leaning in ever so slightly to see if anyone's noticing that it's behaving differently. The laws haven't broken, they've flexed. Have you seen it? That subtle tilt in the pattern? That near silent note in the background score that wasn't there last week? If not, listen again. Because something has noticed the alignment that's been forming in secret, and now the mirror's turned inward. Some phases don't arrive with answers. They arrive with pause. And that pause isn't emptiness, it's density. It carries weight, potential, pressure. Right now, existence seems to be narrowing into a kind of corridor, one where nothing has collapsed, but nothing has fully clicked into place either. It's that strange tension before movement, when the next step hums beneath the floorboards but doesn't yet rise to meet the foot. The sensation isn't absence, it's proximity, as if something important has been called but hasn't yet turned the corner. That's not delay, it's sequencing. This lunar cycle, modest in appearance, acts less like a spark and more like a slow spin of gears, aligning behind a wall. No fireworks, no loud revelations. Just the steady hum of reality pressing inward, compressing possibility into a tighter coil. This is not the time of breakthrough, but of hold. The nervous itch, the stalled plans, the nearly finished conversations. None of them are broken. They're suspended. And suspension, though uncomfortable, is often the last gate before clarity floods in. It's worth asking, what if all this silence is rehearsal? Still thinking about what you just heard? That's not an accident. Subscribe. Let what's waking up in you keep unfolding. What tends to happen on days like this is subtle but universal. Interactions trail off mid-thought. Tasks hover near completion but don't resolve. Even thoughts seem to orbit instead of landing. The fabric of reality mimics the internal landscape, a synchronized dissonance designed not to frustrate, but to attune. This is the space between arrival and activation, where the mind wants answers, but the soul is still preparing to receive them. And here's the twist. This moment isn't hiding the path, it is the path, just not in the shape anyone expected. So sit still, even in the ache of inaction, because when it moves, it won't knock, it will flood. In most spiritual spaces, there's a recurring mantra about guarding the edges, being mindful of who siphons energy, who depletes through disguise. But this particular alignment shifts that entire dynamic. Rather than encouraging defense, it initiates disappearance. Not disappearance of presence, but of visibility to anything unaligned. The current lunar tension doesn't sharpen shields, it smooths frequency. And in doing so, it renders certain patterns unable to locate what no longer vibrates within their reach. The mechanism is simple, yet profound. Nothing is forced, nothing is blocked. Instead, a quiet reconfiguration begins to take place. Identity starts to hum at a different pitch. It's not resistance, it's refinement. The emotional static that once clung so easily finds nothing to latch onto. Encounters that once left a subtle ache now pass by unnoticed. Even internally, there's a strange absence of friction, like an inner room has been sealed from the usual noise. Has anyone else been feeling that? It's easy to misread the shift. When usual interruptions stop knocking, when habitual noise forgets to shout, it might seem like something has gone missing. But nothing's missing. What's happening is filtration. And those who once drained attention or patience might begin to wander off without explanation. Not in anger, not in avoidance, but because resonance no longer welcomes their signal. Think about that for a second, how protection can sometimes arrive not as defense, but as non-recognition. On a day like this, peace doesn't defend itself. It becomes invisible to disturbance. Something is stabilizing beneath the surface, not as a reward, but as a recognition. When energy is held in integrity long enough, it stops broadcasting distress. And when distress fades, certain old patterns, once drawn like moths to flame, stop arriving altogether. What replaces them isn't louder, it's finer. This isn't protection by force, it's insulation by evolution. And in that subtle evolution, something long dormant begins to stir. Not new, not recent, but old in a way most modern senses have forgotten how to read. Could it be that some connections don't form in time, but awaken through vibration? You're not here by mistake. If this felt like home, it probably is. Subscribe and stay where the deeper truths live. This lunar imprint isn't calling down new visions. It's surfacing old agreements. Agreements written outside of language, traced in moments before identity took shape. And no, this isn't about receiving a message or waiting for a sign. It's more personal than that. It's the internal shift from seeker to source. That's the twist. Some archetypes don't arrive from beyond. They awaken from within. What once felt distant begins to feel familiar. What was once guidance is now instinct. Ever get the sense that something has been waiting, not to guide, but to merge? The feeling is subtle, almost missable. A sense that a forgotten role is brushing just beneath the threshold of memory. Not fantasy, not longing, but a role paused, willingly set aside in order to embody something else. Now the conditions are shifting. The outer noise has quieted just enough for the original signal to pulse again. This isn't ascension, it's remembrance. The script isn't being rewritten, it's being resumed. And somewhere in that quiet ache of recognition, the path picks up exactly where it left off. Strange, right? How some doors never truly closed, just waited for the right voice to speak them open. That's the quiet power of this moment. Why the silence doesn't feel empty, but weighted, almost deliberate. It's not bringing in something new. It's stripping away the static so something pre-existing can finally be heard. Not externally passed down, but internally remembered. And that's why certain philosophies or practices, once so expansive, now feel strangely constricting. The teachings haven't changed. The receiver has. And the friction isn't confusion, it's transition. When a deeper framework starts to emerge, the scaffolding around it naturally feels obsolete. This is not about a shift in ideology. It's a realignment with something that's always been circling, quietly, patiently, like a signal waiting for resonance. It's not entering from beyond, it's crystallizing from within. This phase doesn't require an outside interpreter. It doesn't need names or rituals or reference points. What it requires is stillness. The kind of stillness that allows a memory to bloom without narrative. Because this isn't information, it's embodiment. What begins now cannot be explained through language. And frankly, isn't that a relief? There's a price, though. Once the current locks into place, shrinking back into old patterns won't be tolerated by whatever is calling this forward. It's not punishment, it's programming. What this moon initiates is not a peak moment, it's a silent blueprint. A spiritual template laid down like circuitry beneath the skin. Don't expect dramatic signs, expect echoes. The type that fold into decisions, into reactions, into instinct. The type that return in strange disguises months later, and only then reveal they were never gone, just buried inside the architecture, waiting for their cue to activate. What's being set in motion during this lunar interval isn't meant to reveal itself all at once. It functions more like an energetic sketch. An outline that disappears as soon as it's drawn, then seeps into the fabric of minor choices and passing gestures. It won't announce itself. It blends, camouflage within ordinary moments. A phrase overheard, a familiar symbol in a forgotten place, a hesitation that somehow lingers. And weeks from now, when the moon rounds itself out again, that blueprint reactivates, not as memory, but as recognition. The pattern won't repeat, it will re-emerge, polished. And that moment of pause, it won't feel like déjà vu. It will feel like something once encoded finally surfacing. Encounters on this day may seem insignificant, too fast, too quiet, too subtle to hold meaning. But something unassuming will plant itself. A name that slips by, a glance that echoes, an image that lingers longer than it should. Later, those fragments bloom into structure. A forgotten detail becomes the hinge of a decision. A stranger becomes a pivotal thread. This isn't about foreshadowing, it's about layering. Because June 3rd isn't offering outcomes. It's embedding coordinates. Ever had a moment resurface years later with an eerie sense of completion? That's not hindsight, it's echo returning in full form. And that's the catch. By the time the full context reveals itself, it may already be too late to catch its origin in real time. Not because it was hidden, but because time, in this case, wasn't moving linearly. This alignment folds past and future into a shared field, and anyone sensitive to its pulse might feel it physically. A tightness without cause, a subtle urgency without direction. It's not anxiety, it's a calibration lag, the energetic equivalent of arriving a few seconds before the doors open. So if something feels slightly out of place, slightly ahead of itself, pause and notice. The moment hasn't passed. The moment is still catching up. Something subtle is signaling movement, not through crisis or chaos, but through timing that doesn't announce itself. It's not loud, it's not immediate, but it's unmistakable. There's an odd urgency rising, as if an unseen itinerary has quietly started without handing out the schedule. The current lunar phase isn't triggering endings, it's coordinating arrivals. What's unfolding isn't late, it's early. Early enough to confuse the senses into thinking they've missed something. And maybe in a way they have. Not because the door closed, but because it opened before recognition could catch up. Ever felt that strange acceleration, where the moment seems to know you before you know it? This isn't linear momentum, this is convergence. A kind of forward-folded time that doesn't ask for punctuality, it asks for presence. Glimpses will come as mismatched signals. An encounter that seems misplaced, an opportunity that appears too soon, a moment that repeats without explanation. But what if none of it is misaligned? What if the rearrangement is the message? The moon is shifting coordinates without offering a legend. It's not withholding information, it's expanding it beyond prediction. The destination is approaching not by steps, but by becoming. And once something familiar begins to recognize itself through new eyes, the real architecture begins to reveal its edges. Sleep for some may feel impossible now, not because of thoughts racing, but because the body is tuning itself to a signal it doesn't consciously understand. The feeling isn't chaos, it's current. As if a tide has begun pulling inward, not crashing, just quietly tugging on the center of gravity. That's not restlessness, that's the summons. Some changes don't happen in the daylight, they begin in the nervous system. So if the air feels electric, or if the hours feel heavier than usual, don't rush to explain it away. Just ask this: what if the shift has already started, and awareness is simply the last part to arrive? Lately, something strange has been happening to the rhythm of night. Not in dreams, but in the hours when the mind hovers, alert, wordless, waiting. It begins with an unexpected stillness, the kind that cracks open just before dawn, not out of fear, but out of recognition. As if some internal system has begun assembling itself mid-sentence. No rush of anxiety, no story to complete, just movement. Quiet, relentless, intelligent movement. This isn't sleeplessness, it's signal. And for those already hovering near the edges of subtle perception, it arrives early, uninvited, but unmistakable. The body doesn't fight rest because it's restless. It fights rest because something is pressing into awareness, and unconsciousness would miss the message. It's not about the moon altering moods or amplifying emotions tonight. It's about the recalibration of frequency itself. Some forms of awareness don't descend through sleep. They rise through conscious tension. The result? A pulse that wakes the body but speaks in silence. Electrical, symbolic, maybe even disorienting. What if that unexpected wakefulness was less a disruption and more a delivery? External signals may mirror the shift. Animals pacing for no reason, static in the atmosphere, electronics glitching, lights reacting without cause. Not ominous, just evidence. This isn't the paranormal, it's pattern recognition. The cosmos leaves breadcrumbs, but not always for the intellect. So what happens when those breadcrumbs bypass logic and go straight into sensation? A flicker, a phrase, an impulse to move furniture, write something cryptic, or simply sit still for no reason. That's not randomness. That's the transmission arriving. And here's the part no one prepares for. This alignment doesn't wait for clarity, it expects trust. Not blind faith, but cellular agreement. Tonight may feel like interruption, but beneath that surface, another clock has struck a different hour, one the outer world can't track. And in that gap, something paused mid-cycle is waking back up. No alarms, just resonance. So if the world feels off, maybe it's because something finally lined up. Could it be that what felt like insomnia was just the soul's way of answering an ancient notification? Every cycle carries its own function, and this one arrives not as a guide, but as an editor. The current lunar alignment isn't here to illuminate, it's here to extract. But unlike emotional upheavals that demand attention, this force operates with surgical calm. It finds the loop that's gone unnoticed, the energetic glitch, the habitual echo. And without negotiation, it disconnects. No alarms, no resistance, just absence. The kind that feels so natural, it goes undetected until later, when the absence is the only thing that feels real. What leaves now doesn't leave with explanation. It just vanishes, as if it was never fully rooted to begin with. There's no mourning when a craving disappears overnight, no grief when an old dynamic slips away quietly. There's just stillness, the kind that doesn't feel like waiting, but like release. Not a conscious decision, not effort, just completion. A tether breaks, the weight dissolves. The narrative ends without punctuation. This is precision detachment. The severance isn't emotional, it's energetic. It bypasses storylines and intervenes at the core vibration. Because the removal isn't rational, the mind won't race to understand it. There's nothing to fix, no thread to trace back. What's unfolding is more elemental than mental. The collective may feel slightly off balance in the days that follow, not because something is wrong, but because something familiar has been edited out of the background. And the strange part? No one can name what changed. That's how clean the cut is. The energy that once stirred noise is simply no longer participating. And in its absence, silence takes on a new clarity. This isn't a dramatic shift. It won't be broadcasted through signs or synchronicities. It won't be confirmed by trends or symbols. It happens in solitude, in the inner room where no one is watching. One quiet decision is made, but not by the mind, by the mechanism beneath identity. A clearing occurs, and what's left behind is not a void, but an opening. Not for immediate replacement, but for perspective. So pause here. Sit in the space that once echoed. Feel what's not pulling anymore. That's not emptiness. That's the exact moment truth makes room for its next version. There's a certain kind of quiet that doesn't come from silence. It comes from calibration. And tonight, that quiet wraps itself around everything, thick like static made still. Even in the middle of conversation, a strange partition begins to form. Not a wall, not detachment, but a resonance chamber pulling each presence back into their own frequency field. This is not withdrawal, it's refinement. The external fades not as rejection, but as necessity, because only in that hush does something subtler get revealed. And when it does, it's quick, a flash of alignment, not thunderous, not dramatic. Just one breath where everything lands, and for a beat, nothing is missing. There's no need to capture it. There's nothing to share. This is the kind of shift that resists storytelling, not because it's vague, but because it speaks in a language that doesn't translate. No signposts, no epiphanies. Just an inner still point so clear it feels like it's always been there. It doesn't demand acknowledgement. It doesn't require proof. In fact, its very power lies in its quiet refusal to be displayed. That moment wasn't gifted to be repeated. It was designed to realign. Think about that. Why do some of the most important turning points feel like nothing at all when they arrive? Because that's how real movement works. It doesn't interrupt the story, it rewrites it from the margins inward. And even if the outer structure remains untouched, the framework underneath has already been altered. A track has been laid underfoot, a door has opened without hinges, and now, even without knowing how, something is guiding differently. Not because direction has changed, but because attention has. The next path won't be louder, but it will respond when the frequency is right. And if something in the air feels like it just shifted without sound, maybe that was the point. If the mind is still engaged at this point, then the moment has already served its purpose. Focus itself is a kind of offering, a choice to remain where most would drift. And in a time where attention fractures easily, choosing to stay present is not passive. It's intentional. There's no final note to strike here, no grand send-off, just a soft acknowledgement that something subtle has stirred beneath the surface. And perhaps that's all it needed to do. Should anything from this moment echo, feel free to let it live a little longer, whether through comment, reflection, or quiet observation. What matters isn't the reaction, but the recognition. That's how awareness extends itself beyond the screen. And if there's a pull to return again, to stay connected as this work continues to unfold, consider leaving a marker. Subscribe, share, or simply bookmark the silence. It helps the signal stay alive. No need for urgency, yet something in the air still hums with that strange anticipation, doesn't it? Like the next note has already been struck somewhere out of range. Until that sound reaches again, stay steady, stay curious, and stay listening.